Welcome to Money on Tap. Money on Tap, your personal finance headquarters, where we bring out the professionals' experience and some fun in what we call three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. That's what we do on this show. We look at all sides of the issues, and we bring a fully independent planning perspective to the table.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info at yourmoneyontap.com. Good to have you aboard with us today. My name is Seth Crespin, joined here with Ben Brayshaw, Dan Mickelin. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing well, Seth. I'm doing well. Summer's moving right along. I can't believe it, Dan. It just we're getting this deluge of rain, so it's hard to enjoy.
Too fast. It was way too fast.
It's so odd for you guys to be talking about the rain when over here in Portland, Oregon, 85 degrees. No troubles. Everything's great.
Well, Seth, we've had, I don't think we've chatted with you about this, but in northeastern New Hampshire, I mean, there's been roads completely devastated, washed out. People can't travel from, one end to another. It's like on both sides up in the lakes region. It's crazy. I mean, it's just completely, the roads are gone. It's horrible.
The rain's really insane. I mean, I think we had 23 or 24 straight days, which is got to be some kind of record. But in between, it's blazing hot. So, I mean, it's not as though it's not summer, but the amount of water is just it's incredible. I planted our garden Memorial Day, and I watered it that day and not since.
So if you're new to Money on Tap, okay, so what are we going to do here today? We're bringing you an inflation update. So there's been decelerating trends, possibly a path to a soft landing, all part of what's baked into today's show. We're all financial planners with Brayshaw Financial Group, and we love doing this on a weekly basis. This is our podcast, Money on Tap. A lot of this really kind of came from an idea of like, how can we just really try to raise the level of conversation in the room and really help people in their financial journey? Because, if you get dropped into a financial planner's office, if you're lucky, once a year, maybe quarterly, if you're super on top of your financial planning, and very few of our clients actually kind of have that desire is what I have those quarterly meetings, but some of them do. If that's your experience, you're just kind of you drink from a fire hose once a year. And there's no wonder why, hey, my dad was a dentist. That's what he did as a profession. And later on down the road, I'm a financial planner. And I find this statistic or some article out there that people would rather go to the dentist than sit with their financial planner. I was in shock, absolutely in shock. So how do we change this? How do we do this? And we love doing this here with you today on Money on Tap. We're going to have fun, and we're going to talk about some stuff that's pretty darn critical for you to understand in your financial planning journey. So that's our goal.
Seth, it's funny you say that. I mean, there's, when we started the radio show, I had clients say to me that, I really wish I could just get kind of like an economic update from you, separate from your quarterly newsletter or, your regular newsletter and stuff. I really just I'd love to hear your perspective on the market and things. It makes me feel better and stuff like that. That's the only person that's ever said they want to hear me talk. When we're at my house, they want me just to shut up.
It's funny. It's more in line with that, but I still never get over this conversation. So we had a client who came to us because their advisor had passed and, spoke to her a couple times, seemed like a nice enough woman. But she's outright told me if we get together to meet, she will fall asleep. And she has no intention of paying any attention. So I was like, interesting take on that. But
and you're like, with me, I bring the pillow.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than Novocaine, I guess. But
Wow, Dan, you sure it was just the previous advisor?
Hey, so what are we going to do to kick this off with you today? Well, we're going to jump into some recent news, and we call it Money in the News.
And coming up first, forced to retire at 60, this firefighter's finances took a big hit, like so many other retirees. This is from Susan Tomper at the Detroit Free Press. And usually we look for kind of lighter, kind of uplifting, funnier articles here to share. But this one, I really felt hit home because it's something that we've talked about a number of times over the course of retirement planning shows. And it's that the pension system isn't always something that can be relied upon as previously thought. And this story is about a retired firefighter who was forced to retire at age 60 only to find out through a series of issues with the city of Detroit was going to face a real downturn and shortfall in his monthly income. And this guy was a little bit of a celebrity there. He'd won they call him the Fireman Crooner because he won a national anthem singing contest at the home of the Detroit Tigers and actually won a $10,000 prize on that while he was still working and shared some of that money. He bought a bunch of microwaves for firehouses around the city. So seems like a really nice guy here. But unfortunately, he had the experience, the firsthand experience of having his pension be reduced, which was part of a law enacted by Obama that we've referenced there a bunch of times on the show, where that Multi-Pension Employer Act, gives cities and municipalities and any multiple person employer the ability to do this should they face enough financial hardship. As we all have heard, that Detroit went through a bankruptcy in the 2010s that led to this guy's particular issue and an over 10% drop in his pension income.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't the most horrific story of the ones we've referenced in the past under the Pension Reform Act. I think it was the 2014 Obama 2014 Pension Reform Act. I think you can Google that, and it's pretty crazy, but it's the multi-employer. So a single employer doesn't have that right yet that I'm aware of, but if a multi-employer, and that included municipalities and so forth. I mean, what's really sad about this article is this guy was clearly a generous, giving person. I mean, he won $10,000, and for somebody who wouldn't mind having, $10,000 and could, probably didn't foreshadow, necessarily what was going to happen, but the donation that he made on that was pretty cool, and I thought it was wonderful. But he really wished he could continue working. Like he really enjoyed being a firefighter. He really, and Dan, you have people in your family that are firefighters, and I have friends that are, and it's a sacrificial role. You're running in saving people in a way that you just can't be armed for some of this stuff. You can wear a bulletproof vest sometimes, but sometimes you're just running in and you're sacrificing your life for others. And so that's just a really selfless role. So to see this really impact him, he's working a regular job now. If it's a dealership or something, I can't remember, but he's making $15 an hour, and clearly he's being underpaid and for what he's qualified to do. And so that's kind of sad. But he's just trying to make ends meet, and he's spending down his money. He's eating into his principal, and this is a problem. Some of these cities are just they're not operating financially well. They've overpromised, underdelivered. I mean, who knows what he would have done if he knew some of these things would have happened with his own savings and so forth.
Yeah, the one of the final statements here by Rucker, the gentleman that we're talking about, is that Detroit was not bankrupt. He maintains this 10 years after the bankruptcy filing. He says it was a money grab. There's nothing really substantiating or supporting that statement. I'm kind of on the side of, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. That really would not surprise me to see an opportunity like this. And we've seen other examples of this where people have, instead of tightening the belt in other areas, they've just gone ahead and they've made good people suffer. I got to say that's really infuriating to me. We've had other stories of firefighters as well that have had their pensions cut. And in retirement, they have an income, and then they've got to deal with less.
I think,
that's a really, really tough road to be, or situation to be in, and that's upsetting. I had a couple other points, but go for it, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, one of the things I really am glad we have this article here is because a lot of people hear the word pension, and there's a lot of people that still walk through our door that have a pension, and they see it as like it's lock, stock, and barrel going to guarantee me this much income, and we keep telling people you need to plan around, mitigating this problem, and people are just not aware that their pensions are potentially, faulting. I would say go back to one of our shows on the talking about the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corp, the PBGC, and with all these pensions, everyone's making claims all at the same time. The baby boomers who have all of these pensions, pensions don't really exist anymore, and so those who do have them are all making claims on this system that doesn't have enough money really. And honestly, the PBGC that's backing these pensions don't have enough money to back them either. So, I think, whoever, eventually these things are going to run out of money. And the government was supposed to not back these things. And yet in this, one of the, last things in the last few years, they did send some money, I believe, to the PBGC. It was like 80 million or something like that, Dan. That's a number that rings a bell to me. But I remember when that was put in place, that was a big stickler item. We are not, as a federal government, backing the PBGC. And this that recent legislation in the last few years has kind of put them in a sticky position, and it was inappropriate, I think, highly debatable.
Yeah, I mean, this guy made a series of moves in his own life that, were for the benefit of the community he's in, and then he shares how the community let him down. I mean, he had a job in the auto industry paying $45,000 a year, but he decided in 1999 to take a job at the fire department and kind of give back, and he was a big community believer. But he took a pay cut down to $25,000, with the understanding and expectation, though, that he was going to have this pension benefit. Come to find out, he gets forced to retire at age 60, so sooner than he wish he would have. Still on the full pension, though, early in his retirement, which he said was a 7-month vacation ultimately. But the crime was so bad and where he lived, and there was a series of homicides and robberies in his neighborhood, he decided to move, take on a new mortgage, and then gets his pension cut. So you see the city just letting him down at all different kinds of levels. And, with some of the things going on in our city communities with crime and financial malfeasance, it really is important that if you are a recipient of a pension like this or plan to be one, think you will be one, take a really good hard look at that and make sure it's as strong as you believed it was when you signed up.
Next up on our list here, this is an interesting one and something we've talked about a little bit. Blue is the new white. Labor market's sudden shift towards skilled trade workers is a win for blue-collar jobs. This is by Kristen Altus. This is Fox Business. The article is really addresses a lot of what we've chatted about on the show in past conversation, that with the massive baby boomers and the last 20 or 30 years of intense college focus, like let's get my kid to college so they can get a great job, they have seen this massive shift of people out of the blue collar workforce. Electricians, plumbers, various forms of carpenters and laborers, and now we have this huge void. Matter of fact, the void was so large that the article references that more than 770,000 skilled job postings from nearly 95,000 different companies nationwide were listed. And I think that's just a crazy number. And the truth is that most of the skilled laborers are retiring out of the workforce. So we still have a void that is continuing to grow, and it is concerning. I remember I had talked about this one other time, that I was listening to an economist, and I wholeheartedly disagree with the rampant number of people coming across the border illegally. I think we have legal ways to get people in, but she had said in a statement that we will be welcoming people across the border because we have so much lack of workforce in 20 years. And I think that was about 10 years ago that I went to listen to her speak. She was an economist on CNBC. And I just thought that was interesting. Like, really? And then you start thinking about all the numbers and the people and her point was that most of the laborers were actually getting older and aging out of the workforce, that in 20 years, we would have this massive missing group of people to do just the most basic jobs in our country.
I mean, it used to be a skill that got passed down, right? These whatever skilled labor force you were in, it was almost expected to be inherited, right? If your father did it, you would do it, and so on and so on. But somewhere along the way, you're right, Ben, there was this notion developed that, hey, listen, rather than have my kids put in the effort and the labor and the many years of hard work, they'll be better off going to school. Let's send them off to college. And that this doesn't necessarily pan out. I mean, these people in the skilled labor force here are making considerable livings and doing quite well, because there is this absolute need for them to fill in and do a ton of work. And there's just so few people prepared to do it or able to do it.
Well, I would even say, I mean, I speak from my own perspective, but I would say that when I was in high school, it was almost looked down upon if you weren't going to college. Would you agree with that, guys? I mean, I kind of felt,
yeah, definitely.
There's definitely that kind of push. And in the article goes into the fact that college enrollment has declined roughly 15%, while the number of apprentices has increased by more than 50%. And I think that has to do with what the pay is. I mean, kids are seeing that, hey, listen, I can make $100,000 a year or more without going to college, and I can do something working with my hands and not be stuck behind a desk. And we've encouraged one of our kids that pursue this avenue. Like, these are all your skill sets. You're going to have a great time and you're going to make a great living. I mean, you go to college, now you're one of many.
So interesting, because this is very real conversation that we're having with our 18-year-old right now, who is going to college, and he's got a direction and a focus that he wants to become an athletic director for a NCAA school. That's what he wants to do. So he really does need to go to college to do that, and he also wants to play football and wrestle. So good for him. And before all of that, we've had the conversation like, hey, really look at the trades. And here's the thing. If you build up a trade and you have that in your back pocket, you can finance your college. You don't have to depend on loans or any of that kind of stuff to do this. If you really, truly have a desire to go to college and get something out of that college education, become a doctor, whatever. Sure enough, we've actually, created a little business for him. And this is not necessarily a trade. Pressure washing, I don't know that falls under trades necessarily, but it is a service. And that's what he does during the summer in his little business, to finance the college that he's looking to do. So anyways, I was going to say there's all of his buddies that are graduating with him and stuff. I think there's about 5 of them that I've talked to that are becoming electricians. And we have in Oregon this community college. Kids can get their associate's degree at community college paid for. So they don't even have to worry about those finances. And they're still bypassing that to go straight into a trade school. And you know what? I'm so happy for them. They're going to be 21 years old and buying their first house when their friends are getting out of college and trying to figure out how to, get a job and pay rent. So, bravo.
Yeah, I think
that's changed. I think that is a change. I think that's a bit of a shift lately, and maybe it's regional. Maybe that's where we're at. But that does seem to be a lot of the conversation we have with parents around here, and what we're focused on.
I think that hits one of the chords that really jumped off the article to me, and it's just something in the back of your mind inherently. But in reading the articles, the person being interviewed from the trade side points out the fact that, in his world, you get paid to be an apprentice. You actually get paid to learn,
right? Versus
going to college where you are paying to learn, and you're coming out to a very much uncertain future unless you have a super specialty. But these guys, it's like an assembly line. You apprentice, you get into the union. You work at 20 years, maybe you get a pension, but you've built a skill set that's transferable.
Well, the thing that's really interesting to me is I know somebody who has sold out a portion of their business or a chunk of their business to private equity, and private equity is getting into this space pretty heavily because they see this as like the demand will be so massive that the charge that they'll be able to make will be so great. And I think it's interesting because there's probably a lot of investment opportunity over the next 10 years. In some of this kind of like whether it's remodeling, refurbishing, fixing your heater, you may not be able to do a whole reno job because you can't find anyone to do it. But if you have no heat, you're going to pay somebody to fix your boiler. If you have no power, you're going to pay someone to come in and fix your whatever, your generator or something. Like those are needs, and you're going to pay whatever it's going to cost.
They're just
your house is leaking. You're going to pay whatever it's going to cost.
It's a simple notion. There's no real science to this, but I just know from pricing out this kind of work lately, the spread between what you need to pay an electrician per hour and what you need to pay an attorney per hour is shrinking pretty quick.
That's a great point. But I just think from an investment perspective, people don't really think about this area as an investment opportunity, but private equity is seeing it that way, and I know a number of those things. So.
Well, we almost don't have time for this to squeeze in, but let's go for it. It's first-gen iPhone sells at auction for $190,000, almost 380 times its original price by Associated Press. Yeah, this is our world today, where it just seems like yesterday when my friend showed up, Carlos. Of course, it was Carlos because he's always, Carlos is that guy that always has the nice watch and the new thing off the rack. And he shows up with this iPhone, and I've got my, BlackBerry or something like that at the time. I'm like, what in the world is that? It was so cool, right? It was just like, and I couldn't even get it. I just was looking at the screen like, wow, you can touch this and it moves and it works. But it took me probably a couple of years before I really truly understand what an app was. How an app works.
That is super funny. Yeah, I know. I remember my BlackBerry. What was the other one that came with the pencil? It was what was that other?
Palm.
Yeah,
Palm
the Palm.
Trio.
Yeah, Palm's gone. And there was another one that sold for $63,000, I think, and it was an 8 gigabyte model or something like that. But they were all in the
same gen. It just had more capacity.
But they were all in their original packaging. Because as soon as I read this article, I started reading this article, I was like, I got one of those old phones somewhere.
I got a box full of that junk. Right?
What's this
Where'd
one
that
worth?
thing go? Hurry, quick, find it.
I don't know if Apple would give me a $100 trade in on one of those, I'd be probably happy with it too.
I got the first BlackBerry flip phone. I don't know what that's worth, right?
I didn't even know they made one.
No, touchscreen. It wasn't flip. It was the first touchscreen when they got rid of the keyboard finally.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said, but Apple definitely made a huge difference in that space. I'm really kind of curious, just from an Apple standpoint, like where are they going to really engage AI, their version of Siri, and trying to help that and magnify. I hate Siri. I mean, I think it's horrible. But I just really curious about when Apple engages AI in a conversation, like. What's that going to look like when they launch that conversation?
Well, it might look like Siri having her feelings hurt by what you just said and shutting down your plan. So
you're probably right, sadly.
That's going to do it for us in Money in the News. You're listening to Money on Tap. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be getting into in this inflation update and this decelerating trends and this path to a soft landing. Maybe, maybe not. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. Hey, if you are out there and you haven't subscribed on the podcast, what are you waiting for? Subscribe. Let us know. Drop us a line. We can't wait to send you some Money on Tap gear, get you hooked up, and just appreciate you for being out there and listening to us and subscribing on the podcast of Money on Tap. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Dan Mickelon here with Brayshaw Financial. Looking for a hassle-free way to invest? Look no further than Brayshaw Financial Group. With Brayshaw Financial Group, you can start investing with as little as $100, enjoy a user-friendly platform with a diverse range of investment options. Visit Brayshaw Financial Group and start your investment journey today. Brayshaw Financial Group, investing made easy.
You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. We are talking about the inflation update. Decelerating trends as the path towards a soft landing may be happening, maybe not. That's what we're talking about on the show. If you're looking to get a hold of us, you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. Why would you do that? Well, we're all financial planners. That's what we do. And that's part of the fun of us talking about some of this CPI and what that means. How is that filtering through your life right now? Are you a business owner? Have you or are you retired? Wherever you're at in your life, you're seeing a different perspective than maybe what the headlines are telling us. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And we also want to be open to just the conversations that we're hearing, across the board as far as what some of these outcomes might be, where we're, what does the data tell us? There's a lot of interesting stuff that's kind of packed inside this conversation for us today. So we're glad that you're here with us. And Dan, let's jump in here. The June CPI numbers, okay, they came out softer than expected. Both headline and core CPI advancing by only 2%, and it seems like the trend of disinflation is intensifying. So, what's your take on some of these numbers?
So, before we dive directly into the numbers, I just wanted to kind of set the frame of reference here, and we did this in a show, I think our very first show about inflation when this thing really started taking off about a year ago, is how they actually measure inflation, right? And I know we talked about a couple of month-by-month numbers there, but the main headline numbers that you see in print all over the place, and when there's pundits on TV talking about this, what they're doing is they're taking a 12-month view, right? So when they say inflation's down in June, they're looking at June of last year to June of this year, right? So everything in between is kind of irrelevant in that comparison, although we obviously follow trends and that matters. When you're defining the number and we're trying to use the same scale that the Fed's using, it's that year-over-year perspective, right? So inflation was at a peak 12 months ago at over 9%, and it's come down to 4.8%. So that is a significant drop. They've almost halved the inflation number from where we're at. But we're still 100% away from getting to the 2% target that the Fed stated is their goal here. So there's definitely a disinflation trend. There's no doubt about that. And I think, we've seen the market react to that, but we're still not all the way there yet. And part of what we want to dive into is, where's the credit due for this? Is this really, a byproduct of the Fed's moves, or is this something that's happened, because of other things out there that are affecting our economy and prices and how we all buy things and spend money? And there's some consideration there around, whether or not the moves the Fed has made has hurt us as consumers when it comes to things like mortgages and credit cards and everything else that's interest rate driven. You can certainly have that perspective. But it's clearly a trend here. There's no doubt about that. So prices have begun to come down in a lot of domains, but not everywhere. Excluded from here, and this is one that we always have fun with, is some of those core inflation measures, which is only the two most important things, probably shelter and energy, right? Those are significant needs for all of us at any given point in time. And those numbers are not factored into the base CPI that we talk about here.
Well, I think in food, food's not factored in. And this is a complicated conversation because, when it comes to what the Fed's speaking about, it feels disconnected when you're talking to somebody who's actually spending the money out of their pocketbook. Pretty much everyone in the Fed is not worried about the cost of the food bill. If you're on the board, you're not worried about it. You're making a ton of money, and you're like, yeah, guys, we'll just exclude food. It's not a big deal. I mean, we joke around about the cost of eggs over the last, 5 out of the last 40 shows, or whatever. And the truth is that when I look at my food bill, I mean, it is literally almost double what we were paying a year ago still. I mean, it is not declining in any capacity. So we're not going backwards in anything. It's kind of like accept the new normal is kind of how I feel. I mean, as you mentioned, we were talking before the show, gas is down 25%. Well, whoop-de-doo. I mean, it's still up almost 100 since Trump was in office. So, when you really look at these numbers, like people are still bleeding from this experience. I mean, we were sitting down with somebody yesterday and we're talking about, their expenses and so forth. And they just verbally acknowledge it's kind of part of everyday conversation. It's like, I know it's really hard to figure out how much we spend, but I've come up with this number and just everything is so much more expensive than it used to be. So nothing's declining. Nothing's like settling back into a place of normalcy or a reasonable, number of what we would expect a kind of a healthy inflation to be. I think everyone was hoping that we would climb this mountain and we come sailing back, and then we'd have kind of a normal, trajectory line of inflation, and that has not happened. I mean, things have just kind of held up there, and we're just stalling further inflation from that space. So I'm really glad to see some of these numbers in June, do what they've done. But, I do have concerns because, the drawdown on people's retirement funds and accomplishing retirement income is just becoming a harder challenge, for every one of the people listening today is, how do I make retirement a reality? I mean, that's really the core conversation of 90% of our clients, right? Like I want to live a productive, healthy retirement period. I want to be with my grandkids, or we want to go on some trips, or we want to do this, or we just want to survive. There's people that come in saying, we have a bunch of money, but our expenses are just massive. These things don't go without notice, and I'm glad the Fed's doing as well as they're doing, but I think there's obviously a disconnect between the conversation we're going to have today and our listeners on some level that I think is important for us to recognize.
Yeah, so the perception that you're talking about here, which I think is really valuable, which is that idea that where we were at like a year and a half, 2 years ago, like disinflation somehow is going to get us back in line with a 2% from that point, right? Moving forward. Like that was the baseline. But what's really happening, or what the numbers are talking about right now, is that we've gone up 8-9% from where we were at. And then from that point, moving forward, we've kind of come back down a little bit. But we really are at this place of moving forward from there at around 2%, right? So there's no coming back down. It's just moving forward from the highest point that we set previously. That's where we're at. Is that correct?
I mean, that's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, in the position of being one of these manufacturers, suppliers of widget, whatever, right? And had this experience of inflation going on, and you realized you were able to charge whatever increase and pass through that increase to your consumers, whether it was real or not. But this expectation that everyone had to pay more for everything. So now you find yourself in this place where inflation's cooling, but are you really going to reduce the price of your goods? Why would you do that?
Well, okay, so in August of 2020, the Federal Reserve adopted a monetary policy. It was called the FAIT, as you guys know, the Flexible Average Inflation Targeting. And they believe that the average should be 2%. They've always believed that. That's their new monetary standard. It's completely different and so forth, and it's an average of 2%. So the communication over these last 3 years has been, we want to get to 2% inflation. We want to get to 2% inflation. And it's been an average, a July to June, July 1st to next June 30th. Like, we want to evaluate a 1 year 2% thing. Now the conversation, including a Barron's article we were, reading before we were getting into the show, talked about the Fed just wants to reach 2%. They just want to get to the number, because the average, when you have these 9%, months, we've talked about this before, to get to a 2% average, this FAIT, monetary policy, you got to go well below 2%, or you have to be at 2% or lower for a 11th or 12 month period, right? I mean,
right.
So the average conversation is very complicated. And so the idea of raising rates, and, I've been saying for a long time on the show, Fed's going to raise rates 2 more times this year. And now there's a massive number of people that still agree that something's going to happen this July. It's going to be a quarter point. I think we're still going to have 1 more this year. I think that's going to be the final kicker. But I mean, based on these numbers, but I've thought, I don't think they're cutting this year or next. I really don't. I think the Fed just delivers a little bit of dripping bad news at a time and helps you think or feel it's good because they don't want to overwhelm the economy. But if they had told us a year ago they're going to raise rates this high, the Dow would be worth 1,000. I mean, we wouldn't be where we're at. So that's, I don't want to call them liars, but they're liars. Like they manipulate your thinking so you feel good about bad news.
Yeah, there's a lot of reactions they're trying to stave off, and a lot of facts they're trying to work with. And, the one thing that I think that the trend clearly demonstrates is that there's some effect happening, right? Inflation's moving down. Bottom line, it's moving down. But, where is the credit due for that? I mean, what are the reasons behind this trend? Because, one of the things that they told us, essentially right off the bat is, that the mechanics of rate increases affecting inflation, would take 9 to 12 months to kind of work their way through. But this deflationary event happened prior to that, right? So either this Fed increasing of rates had the quickest effect in history, or something else is driving down these numbers.
Well, I agree. And I think their original goal of hitting the 2% average by, mid 2023, which we've met and we're not there, I think they're starting to see some positive things. But yeah, I don't think the Fed is solely responsible for this at all. And I think that's what we want to really dive into.
Yeah, there's a couple other, I think, primary drivers here. And one that I think we've all experienced and can relate to is this whole supply chain snarl up, right? That was, credited to COVID and the fact that oil prices were extremely high, so it was tough to transport goods, and truck drivers and shippers of all different types were laid off and finding new jobs, different things to do to make a living. Well, now they're back in the workforce, and they're back doing what they did before. They're driving trucks. The gas is a little cheaper than it was. So that all pent-up demand and inability to deliver goods has kind of worked its way through the economy. Now you can actually get things that you order in a timely fashion, and a lot of that COVID money is kind of dried up and spent by now. And the people who are cooped up buying everything they could online, well, they're out in the retail shops and spurning the economy that way. And I think one of the key indicators that this is not only happening, having a real effect, was got nothing to do with the Fed, is that the Fed's stated goal in going through this and trying to decrease this inflationary number was to impact the economy, not to push us into recession, although that was an expected outcome by many, but to hurt the economy in a way to slow spending. Well, inflation's coming down, the economy's booming. That was their number one goal in doing this, and that has not happened, yet the effect is there.
I think the supply chain, Dan, is a big piece here. I think, I've waited, years for things that we've ordered or wanted or whatever. I mean, people, whether it's a couch or a chair or a rug people are like, why can't I get this thing? And I mean, obviously we know the world was shut down for 2 years, so everyone's catching up with it. And at some point in time, hey, everyone's reached their capacity. Hey, we've got everything you need. So I wouldn't even say we're there, but it has definitely become easier to get stuff for sure.
Yeah, supply chain was huge. I just have a story this summer about that. Last summer, we ordered windows. Our house was built in 1990, so we had these glass packs that were completely blown out. You'd see like streaks and watermarks in them. They were way past due. We ordered these windows, and really, honestly, we forgot about it. And then just got this call that like early this summer, oh, hey, your windows are in. And we're like, what? What windows are you talking? Oh, that's right. A year ago, windows. We did that, didn't we? So thank goodness we've got new windows, and supply chain is kicking in. So, real wages have been growing for over a year. The trend's not necessarily dependent on this tighter monetary policy, as I think what we're kind of coming back to. We've got, the fiscal factors of supply chain dynamics, the changes in the consumer behavior. We've talked about that. Just, people are spending, people are investing. Bigger picture is that we're not as willing to get caught up in. And I think this is part of a post-2020 apocalyptic deal, is that we're just not willing to get as caught up in the fear-mongering out there and those roles that the media has played previously. And we're starting to do a little bit more of our own due diligence and not let those narratives play such a huge role in what we're choosing to do today. Hopefully all of us have decided to unplug a little bit from some of those outlets, you guys. And not this one, though, because we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back, and we'll be talking more about how we're landing this plane here in this disinflation period. So you're listening to Money on Tap. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for personalized guidance to kickstart your investing journey? Look no further. Brayshaw Financial Group and our planners are here to help. Our team of experts will provide personalized advice tailored to your financial goals. Visit BrayshawFinancial.com today to schedule your free consultation. Brayshaw Financial, investing made easy.
We appreciate you listening to Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan. You can contact us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's program.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And we have been talking about this CPI, or this disinflationary phase that we've just been starting to come into, and what some of those numbers are and some of the relationships. And, the story out there that the majority of people, I think, would love to be able to believe even, is that the Fed just raising rates has now gone ahead and sent into this remission of our inflation. And a couple of factors, and partially there's a good part of that can be true, but there's other factors involved here that, as this story is told or unfolds, we're understanding a little differently. For one, we were just talking about supply chain snarls easing, and my lovely windows showing up a year later. And I'm sure anybody that's ordering windows this year doesn't have to deal with a year or 2 year long holdup on that. Other pieces here are the commodity prices have come down. And, as much as gas is still, almost $5 a gallon, depending on where you're at in the country, it has come down a little bit, as well as some of the other commodities. And part of that had to do with the, Russia-Ukraine war. But other factors are the point here, is that we're starting to see some of these other prices come down that aren't necessarily tied directly to the Fed rate increases. What do you have to say about that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, another area that's come down is rent, right? That's been a significant one for people. When the increase for March was 8.8% year over year, and for June it came in at 8.3%. So it's still increasing, but it's lessened. And I think that these are some of the measures of CPI or the inflation index, whether credit is due to the Fed or otherwise, were probably some of the easier ones to bring down, right? I think that they just come with a supply and demand effect, and things have loosened up. But I think the rest of the fixation here, right, the cure for our high inflation is going to be a little harder to take effect. And one of the reasons, although it seems like it's good news when I get into the statistic here, but it is counter to what the Fed's goals were. But in June, for the first time since this whole inflation issue kind of really became a problem for our economy, wages increased at a higher rate than the inflation rate. So we've had a lot of people experiencing wage increases over the last 18 months, but they weren't outpacing inflation, right? So you're getting a little bit more in your paycheck, but you're still spending more to buy the same. In June, that changed. The consumer price index was at 4.8%, the increase June over June, but wage increases were at 5.6%. So that's good news for all of us in a lot of ways. It feels good. It's good to say, but it's not what the Fed's looking for. So what are they going to do further to drive their goal by the tools that they have at hand? And that is, likely further increases coming here.
The Fed knows that they're not solely responsible for this. I mean, I love the fact. I mean, everyone wants to take credit. I don't blame them. I mean, I would if I was in their shoes, I guess. Hey, look what we did. But, I mean, what's happened in our world with COVID and, the world shutting down? I mean, it's just, even saying it is kind of like, unless you lived it, you just didn't know it, right? I mean, it's just hard to believe that the whole world shut down. So, that is something that is at a level almost unheard of. Like, I mean, this is a scary type of event, like a world war almost, right? I mean, we'd compare it to those pieces. And I think there's so much that's happened. And I think this economic rise and some of these, even after any world war, right? You're going to have supply chain easing, and you're going to have, the prices of commodities come down. And there's a lot of these things that, would naturally happen, right? Because war and so forth demands a lot of stuff on us. And I think ultimately we're seeing the release of that tragic, crazy event happen in our world. And it takes a few years to see that. But I mean, when you look after World War II, the Korean War, we have some of that facts and data. We saw this massive easing of all these things. We saw the kind of the world open up and, hey, listen, let's get back to work. And I think that's really where we're at. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in our economy right now. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So overall, big picture, that's a part that's hard to kind of gather in some of this. The 3.5% trend that was pre-COVID around the average wages, that was something that was there for quite a while prior to COVID. And if you remember the conversations previous, it was, people just can't keep up with the cost of living. That's nothing new. And then this, super inflation that we went through, just threw everything into just, holy cow, how are people going to survive through this? So good to see that there's now a reversal of that CPI being less than the, average wages, which were up below last summer's, 6.7, but at 5.6. So they're better than the CPI, right? They're above the CPI, but and that's not what the Fed wants, so those numbers don't work for the Fed, but by golly, they work for me and they work for the rest of our, family that are trying to catch up from years of, being behind. And so it's a tough thing to really kind of gather all data here and take a look at the picture and say, well, where are we going? What are we going to see? And 2/3 of the economists do see us heading towards a recessionary issue still. Okay. So that's what economists are talking about. And what we're seeing right now is some positive news and much needed news in terms of just the deceleration of that inflation and those numbers coming back to something that's far better than we've seen, and the continuation of those numbers to continue to slow down, bringing us back into an alignment, which is ultimately what we're looking for. We do want to have some inflation, but we would prefer to see, inline rate increases in people's income, as well as, the rest of the issues that we've been discussing, commodity supply chain, et cetera, to be happening as well. And, As a personal note, I'm really glad to see that, some of the things that have been so not systemic, but just kind of a part of this whole post-COVID supply chain deal was the auto manufacturers actually being able to get some of their fleet on the lot and sold, and that having an effect in the used car sales world, which, those numbers, if you remember, like used cars were just out of sight, boats were out of sight, all these things we just couldn't figure out because there was such a lack of supply, are starting to come in alignment. So people are able to, get some affordable transportation as well.
I think it's really important when we're talking about how we mitigate, inflation is through income, right? And I think the fact that people are making more, that the inflationary piece around income has been higher in a growth rate. I think this is the first time ever, right, Dan? Is that correct? I think it's the first time ever that the inflation in people's income and salaries at work have actually outpaced the inflationary event.
It was the first time during this whole inflationary spell that we're in. So,
and I don't actually think. I mean, I can't be certain of this, but I think that's the first time ever it's happened. But I'm not sure that we've had that, because it's usually like, hey, listen, everything's inflating. Business is more expensive to run. I can't really pay my employees more. The world's kind of struggling. So this is kind of a really unique space. And I think that purchasing power has offset that, so people are not necessarily as hesitant to buy some of the things. I think people did kind of take a breath, and I think people have really re-engaged. I really have seen that as a conversation with a number of people.
Well, I think what's happening here is part of it is that this increase in wages is just replacing that free money that we all had access to, right? The government was just throwing money around. Now your employer has to provide it to you, but it hasn't diminished our purchasing power or willingness to go buy things, which is, I think, key to this. But bringing it all back to where we're at and why we discuss things like this. How does this affect the investing world? What impact does it have on your decision making about being in or out of the market, or what parts of the market? And I think it's important to note, what we've just kind of come across in this is that, you invest in the trend. You don't wait for the number, right? So if you've been waiting for the Fed to say, okay, we're finally at 2% to be the green light to unleash your investment potential and to get into the market, well, look at what's been happening in the market here over the last year. Things have done very, very well, and I think that can be easily attributed to the fact that institutions and big investors they're following the trend. Inflation's begun to come down. They're investing.
And I don't know that, that's only one perspective. But before we jump into that,
we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Money on Tap. We're talking about inflation update, decelerating trends, and the path to a soft landing here at Money on Tap. If you are out there on the podcast world, appreciate you, and subscribe. Let us know, because we want to send you some Money on Tap gear for the subscription and following us. We'll be right back. Hey guys, Seth Cressman with Brayshaw Financial Group. Are you ready to take control of your financial future? Look no further than Brayshaw Financial Group. Our team of experienced advisors is dedicated to helping beginners like you build wealth through smart investing strategies. Visit BrayshawFinancial.com today and start your journey towards financial independence. Brayshaw Financial Group, your partner in wealth creation.
You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And having some fun here as we've been, discussing some of the good news around the CPI. That's not been our conversation for the last year. And this inflation that we've been, for the most part, has been passing its way through our economy is now showing that shine of decelerating and some of these trends towards possibly a soft landing. What are some factors? What is the news inside of that news for you? I mean, of course, everybody would like to see the gas go down to, $3 a gallon. Boy, that would be wonderful. And and their food prices start to come back down in line. That's not necessarily what these numbers are telling us here. And with some of those numbers, right? There are some, well, there's some cautionary tales, but there's also some nuggets of truth. What do you say?
There was a Yahoo article that I had pulled up, and they talk a little bit about the PCE, which is the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index. I mean, that's the food and energy, folks. That's not in the CPI, right? I mean, that's getting down to the nuts and bolts of our lives. I mean, that's whether it's heating your home or running your air conditioning or feeding your family, like that is the nuts and bolts. The Fed has a design to get that to 2% too. I mean, that is their focus. But as of May, it was 3.8, almost twice as much. And I think the three of us were talking about this before the show and kind of during the break too, that there is just so much to this index that really drives the everyday life. I mean, I think you're right, Dan. Investing in the trend, you want to buy before the good news happens, right? You want to buy in the expectation that good news one day will happen, and you don't want to miss that, because when the good news is here, everyone's selling. I mean, I think that's the issue. But at the same time, in this Yahoo article from July, it's Fed's last rate hike coming in July meeting, economist says, it still says that 27 of 41 respondents believe that in the U.S. will have a recession. 85% saying that it's going to happen in 2023. I mean, there is still a massive perspective that we are, 2/3. That's a lot. Believe a recession is coming. I don't know if it's coming this year or next, but if you were to ask me, do I think we're going to have a recession in the next 3 to 5 years? My answer would absolutely be yes, based on everything I know and kind of what's going on. Yeah.
Every expansion has a recession, right? It's part of the cycle. There's no way really around it. And all of us would love to be able to say, let's avoid pain, but it's just a part of what we need to go through as a healthy economy to be able to cycle back out.
Well, I totally agree, Seth. I mean, there's always going to be a recession. I'm not just saying, hey, randomly there will be one. I think
right.
I think we're staring at one. I just don't know how long we're going to carry out this, because there's a couple of white elephants in this thing, right? We have AI, which is a massive white elephant that's not getting any of the respect for what it's done for our stock market. I mean, AI has really, you listen to almost any quarterly call and they're trying to slip the word AI into anything they can, right? So, and I think...
Well, we did it right there.
We did it right there. There you go. So, from our Google search, we're going to have AI in this show. But the other piece of this is that, there has been a large movement to value, and starting to happen moving to value, which I'm a huge proponent of value. If you listen to our show, I'm a massive proponent of value. And I think that shift is in an expectation that growth is seeking a peak. It's seeking a peak, right? People don't care whether they hit the top number. I remember telling my son, I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, you sold that? He goes, oh, I held on to it. And I said, well, you know what? I'm happy with what I made, and I'm looking for another location for those dollars. And I think, people who trade do that all the time. People who are investors hold on to a company usually too long. So I think there's a piece of that where you have to just be thankful you made money and kind of look for the next place you want to locate your cash. And it could be a value stock. It could be a CD at the bank. You could say, hey, I made my return this year. It's been great. Never expected it. I'm going to move all that money to a CD at 4 or 5% or a bond or something. So I think there's been a good shift to value.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy trend. And, you're right. There's this opportunity cost notion, right? So is it worth hanging on to a stock to gain that last $1 or $2 per share because you think it's there, when there's an opportunity to jump out of that into something that's more significantly depressed, where there might be a 5 or 10, 15% return waiting for you in that same time frame, right? So opportunity cost is something to be aware of. When there's an old notion that we talk about on the show a lot too. Never be disappointed in taking a gain. Yeah. Right? If you have the opportunity to take some money off the table, put that gain in your pocket, do it.
All right, that concludes today's episode of Money on Tap. We've explored recent June CPI print and ongoing battle against inflation, highlighting positive trends, debunking some misconceptions along the way. Remember, staying informed and making well-informed financial decisions is crucial in navigating these economic landscapes. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Dan, for your valuable insights. And thank you all for tuning into Money on Tap. Be successful in your investing. We'll catch you next week on Money on Tap.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of this radio station and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. No strategy, product, material, or tool mentioned can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information, products, materials, or tools mentioned should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. This show may be subsidized in whole or in part by a product sponsor or issuer. Securities and advisory services offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor. All other services offered through Brayshaw Financial Group LLC are independent of SagePoint Financial. SagePoint Financial and Brayshaw Financial Group do not provide tax or legal advice. Main office is located at 116 South River Road, Bedford, New Hampshire, 03110, and can be reached at toll-free 855-226-8551.
Well, bye.